And with me in the studio is Edward M. Lerner. Ed, welcome to Fast Forward.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Let's start out a little bit by talking about your background. You're a physicist and you're a computer scientist, and you've worked for a long time in that field, in government contracting and not. How does that help you in your writing?
Well, it helps me in a lot of ways. It's led directly to some story ideas, typically at times when I find I don't have time to do anything with them. And it's also wonderful background. It's not that I can sit down and write a novel without doing research, but that background lets me know where I need to do more research.
Right. Now, you were doing this for a while. When did you actually start writing?
Seriously, in about 1982. And I had little kids then, so that was an evening and weekend sort of activity. I didn't write full-time until 2004.
And what led to your being able to switch and write full-time?
The kids growing up and being almost done with college.
Ah.
There were responsibilities to be taken care of first.
Right, and then so after that you were able to say, let me give a shot at this full-time.
Yes, and I had recently gotten a contract for my second novel, which enabled me to say, hey, this wasn't totally a fluke that I sold the book once. And between the two, I said, if I'm ever going to give it a try, this is the time.
Yep. And so now these are what, your 14th books out now?
14th and 15th.
14th and 15th books. So it did work out.
It did work out. And my wife tells me I'm a lot happier than when I woke up to an alarm clock and dragged out the door at 7 in the morning.
Well, what's your writing schedule usually like? What's your day like when you're in the middle of a book?
I try to be at my desk writing by the crack of 10, which sounds fairly relaxed, I suppose. But I write pretty much nonstop then until 6, so it's still an 8-hour day. And if I'm into things, then I go back after dinner.
Wow.
So, and I do that 7 days a week.
So you're not really working any less than you did before.
No, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And I do have occasional friends and acquaintances who I disabuse of the notion that I write for an hour in the morning and then I'm done.
Yes. Sleep till noon and drink bonbons all day. Eat bonbons all day.
Yes.
So you also write short fiction and nonfiction.
Primarily for analog, but I've been in other markets too, yes.
Right, because you're really kind of the hard science end of things.
Right, and for a while there, Jim Baen's universe was a second hard SF market. I was very sad to see them go. Yeah.
And my understanding is that you had a short story called Grandpa that was actually turned into a film?
Yes, it was made into a movie called The Grandfather Paradox. And I don't suspect any of your syndications are in Canada, but in Canada you can watch it for free. It's streamed because the movie got some funding from a Canadian culture board. The film is called, as I said, The Grandfather Paradox. It runs all of about 7 minutes, but I think it's a hoot. It was a 1,000-word short story, so
that's pretty cool.
I couldn't expect much longer than that.
And it won awards, and
yeah.
I mean that's great. And our Canadian viewers can take a look, see if they can find it.
Yes, and one of the places it got an award was at Balticon,
right,
which is one of your local markets.
And it was semifinalist in 2006 at the Science Fiction Short Film Festival.
Yes.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that gave you kind of a little insight into filmmaking, I guess.
Yes, I would be happy to have Spielberg or Lucas call me up to do a film of one of these, but hasn't happened yet. Actually,
Energized would make a pretty good movie.
Thank you.
I would think it's got some action. It's got really good characters. Why don't we talk about it a bit?
Okay.
It's one where I could see your background in working in government and working alongside of government contractors coming in handy, because the main character is in that business.
Yes. The main character is a contractor at Goddard Space Flight Center, and for 7 years I was a contractor at Goddard Space Flight Center, so certainly
easy
there's that
research.
in common. Yeah. I was on a different large-scale project. I was on something called the Earth Observing System, but it certainly was handy background. Another major part of the book involves radio astronomy, and in the extended neighborhood here is the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Green Bank, West Virginia, which is about a 4-hour drive from my house right now. So that was kind of cool. I drove out there and got really deluxe treatment by the astronomers there. I had them brainstorming on aspects of the book for me. That was cool.
Oh, neat, neat. And I found out recently that around Green Bank is like the largest radio quiet zone anywhere. It's like 16,000 square miles or something where they're not allowed to have any kind of radio. There's no cell phones, anything like that.
That's exactly right. And you know you're getting close to the observatory when your radio station goes away, unless of course you're listening to satellite radio, because they can't do anything about that, and they can't do anything about GPS.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about where the radio astronomy comes in, because it was very interesting, because the book, there's been what you call the crewtastrophe.
Yes.
And that's where basically almost all the oil is no good anymore, right?
Well, it's a combination of it's been radioactively tainted by what I'll euphemistically call a geopolitical miscalculation, and a lot of it has just become militarily off limits because the catastrophe itself has unleashed chaos in the Middle East. And the consequence of that is that Russia, which does have oil for export, is in the catbird seat. And unfortunately, Russia has a tendency to want to make mischief in the Middle East so that oil prices are expensive. So it's fairly close to true. They haven't succeeded in tainting the Middle East's oil yet, but I wouldn't put it past them.
Now, because oil, there's not much oil anymore, everyone's looking for alternative ways of powering things. And that's where the really science fictional aspect of this comes out, which is Phoebe. You want to tell us a little bit about Phoebe?
Okay. Phoebe is a near-Earth object which the United States says, well, rather than deflect it from Earth when it looks like it's getting close, we're going to capture it into near-Earth orbit. And the benefit of that is that the cost of going anywhere in space is mostly getting off of Earth in the first place and doing something about Earth's gravitational effects. It costs thousands of dollars a pound to put anything in orbit, so building anything in orbit is extremely expensive and laborious, and that's how come the International Space Station took roughly forever to complete, and we'll probably never build another one. Phoebe is 1 trillion pounds of building material which I have deposited into orbit at an altitude of, I think it's 7,000 kilometers. And by just melting its water and electrolyzing it, you have oxygen to breathe, you have hydrogen to power your rockets, you have water when you just melt it to drink. And so that's an awful lot of stuff you don't have to hoist into orbit. Now, besides having water on Phoebe, we also have a lot of rock, which gives you silicon, and silicon is how you build, among other things, solar cells. And this is how we get a solar power satellite in orbit, which is the other main science fictional element of the book.
Right, and it's going to beam the power down to Earth.
It's going to beam the power to Earth using microwaves because Earth's atmosphere is basically transparent to microwaves. And so most of the power that you get on the satellite, you can get down to the surface. We should back up a little bit. Why do you want solar cells in orbit rather than on the ground? And it's two reasons.
No atmosphere.
Well, you don't have any scattering of atmosphere. You don't have any weather, which atmospheres are also notorious for, and you don't have night. If you put a power satellite in a proper orbit, which is basically the same orbit where you put comm satellites, you have, I believe it's 75 minutes of shadow twice a year at predictable times around the equinoxes in the middle of the night. The rest of the year you have uninterrupted sunshine. So that's kind of cool for power generation, and as you say, there's no scattering from the atmosphere. The other cool thing is if you make your microwave beam steerable, you can send the power any place on the surface you want it. And so the same power plant can provide peak power to Atlanta in the summer for air conditioning or to Boston in the winter for heating.
Right, right. And where the thriller aspect, because this is kind of a near future thriller book, is that there are people opposed to this. There's the resetters, which are kind of want to take things back.
Exactly. Literally, they want to reset civilization to a much less energy intensive, much less ecologically disruptive past.
And there's also the Russians.
Right.
And what I found interesting is the radio astronomers aren't too thrilled with this. And the second main character in the book is Valerie, I can't remember that.
Claiborne, I believe.
Valerie Claiborne, who's a radio astronomer, who brings Marcus in to talk to her at Green Bank to try to explain why having this is just going to mess it up for the radio astronomers.
Yeah, it messes things up in a lot of ways. And this came straight out of having lunch with a bunch of radio astronomers. Well, the whole point of a solar power satellite is to absorb a lot of solar energy and convert it to microwaves. Well, if anything is absorbing a lot of solar energy, it gets hot, which means it's this big infrared source in the sky. So if you're an infrared astronomer, you're going to hate it like poison. Secondly, when you're beaming the power to the ground as microwaves, the way you shape a beam is by having a bunch of comparatively small transmitters that have the phase of the signals slightly tweaked so that some constructively interfere, some destructively interfere, and you add them all up and you get a steerable radio beam. It's a very similar technology to how steerable radar works. But adding these things up is never quite perfect, and there are signals that leak out called side lobes to a radio engineer. And then there's also the fact that if you've got thousands and thousands of transmitters, some of them are always going to be acting up on you. And each individual transmitter in this array is like a direct TV satellite.
Right. So we've got all these people that don't like Phoebe. And there's the thriller part comes in. I mean, they're going up into space. I love the space hotel. The space place, I think it was called. And this manager is sent up to Phoebe, up into space. And I have to tell you, one of the things that thrilled me was had to have project managers, heroic project managers, because I was a project manager. So we don't get to be heroic much.
Here was a chance.
Yes. And I mean, there's Russian spies and all kinds of things going on. And at the end of the book, the book really gets thrilling towards the end. You don't know what's going to go on. But I want to make sure we have time to talk about Fate of Worlds.
Okay.
You wrote that with Larry Niven.
Right.
And that's got to be a kick to work with a master like Larry Niven.
It's certainly fun. And we have to do it long distance since we live on opposite coasts. We consult a lot about the plot, but I do the complete first draft. Larry says that working together is a spectator sport, which is very flattering. It doesn't quite do him justice, but a lot of what Larry brings to the table is this wonderful universe he's created. So Ringworld is a very important part of this book, even though you scarcely see it.
Yeah, because
it's just disappeared. Now, for readers unfamiliar with Ringworld, the three of them, Ringworld is an artifact that, think of it as a ribbon 1 million miles wide, 600 million miles around, circling a star like the sun. It's got a surface area of about 3 million Earths laid flat. and it's got a population of about 30 trillion.
Right. And he wrote Ringworld, like it was more than 40 years ago.
42.
42
It
years
came
ago.
out in 1970. And because I'm a geek and I like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, I like to think of the series as 42 years in the making.
Yes.
42 being the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Now, one of the things that I always loved about the Ringworld series and known space books are all the same, basically, are the aliens. There are a lot of aliens, and in Fate of Worlds, which is, I think, the 5th book you've written in what's, I think, called the Fleet of Worlds series within
Yes.
the Ringworld, there's, 5, 6 different alien races, most of which you use as point of view characters in the book at different times.
Pretty much, yeah. I think the only alien species that shows up but doesn't provide a point of view character is the Trinox.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got puppeteers, Xin,
Yeah.
AIs,
Yeah.
Gwoth.
Right. And Proteus.
Well, Proteus is an AI.
Yeah, that's right. The
Yeah.
AI Proteus and
And an AI voice.
the Ultro.
Ultro is a Gwoth composite mind. He is an ensemble of 16 Gwoth. He is a Gwotesht. So at some level you could think of a Gwotesht, this ensemble mind, as being yet another species.
I know.
And I think that's fair.
And what I found fascinating is you use them as a point of view character.
Yes, yes I did.
When you're working and writing where your point of view is an alien creature or a gang of alien
Yeah.
creatures, in fact, in some cases, more than one personality of aliens, because you have more than one puppeteer
Right.
in there. What do you do to get that alien to be alien and yet understandable as a character? That's got to be the
I know
toughest
that I
thing.
do it. I'm not sure I always know how I do it. Obviously, I try to be in character, as an actor would phrase it. Try to get in that character's mind. And sometimes I'll write a bunch of consecutive scenes in that character's point of view back to back, so I can stay in that point of view and then go back and interleave stuff that's happening in other characters' point of view.
Yeah, well, it's just fascinating. The way you weave together all the parts of the story. At the beginning of the book, Ringworld has vanished, and you'd think, where can they do a story? But it's a fascinating story that weaves all this stuff together to really, massive revelations of known space.
Well, thanks.
And I'm afraid that we are out of time. I got so much more I'd like to talk to you about. Thank you so much for joining us here in Fast Forward.
Thanks for having me.
And so, from all of us here at Fast Forward, this is Mike Zipser saying, take care.